Hi, I'm Justin, and this is Anne-Marie, and we're the designers of Bloodsuckers. We're going to give you an overview of the game, teach you a little bit about how to play it, and show you how it works.
Bloodsuckers is a competitive game in which players get to choose to be either vampires or hunters and play cards to battle over different locations in the town. Let's go ahead and start with setup.
Sounds good. The setup for Bloodsuckers can change slightly depending on the number of players that are in the game. We're going to go ahead and show you how to set up a 2-player game, and then we'll show you the changes for a 3- and 4-player game. First, players should decide if they want to play as hunters or vampires. If you lay out the guide map, you can see that players should sit across from each other, with the vampire players on one side and the hunter players on the other side. You should also keep the game board nearby where all players can see it. This will track the status of the game. Each player gets their own deck from which they draw a hand of 5 cards. Each player also starts the game with 5 attack counters. You'll want to leave action tokens and the dice nearby where people can get it. You'll also want to deal 3 characters to each player that starts. This character deck will be kept nearby. You'll need that for later. And then lastly, each player gets their own on-your-turn card, appropriate for their side. The vampire players start with 1 blood token in their blood pool, and the hunter players start with 1 adrenaline token in their adrenaline pool. At this point, you're ready to start a 2-player game. The setup for a 3-player game is very similar to the standard setup. Let's say we were going to add another hunter character, so it would be 2 hunters versus 1 vampire. The new hunter character gets their own on-your-turn card, complete with their own adrenaline token. They will also get their own hand of 5 cards. They will get 3 of their own characters, and they will get their own 5 attack counters. Attack counters are double-sided and can be counted for either player depending on how they're flipped. Once this is started, now we adapt the vampire player for a 3-player game. They get an additional 3 characters, so they start with 6, and their hand size is actually now 6 for the rest of the game. There are a few other rules tweaks we'll get to later, but that's the setup for a 3-player game. For a 4-player game, the setup is again only slightly different than the regular. We're going to add an additional hunter character who gets their own adrenaline token and their own on-your-turn card. They also get their own hand of 5 cards, as well as their own 3 new characters. They also get their own unique attack counters, 5 of those. This now concludes what you need to set up for the hunters. We do the same thing for the vampires now. The new vampire player gets an on-your-turn card and 1 blood token in their blood pool. They get their own unique attack counters. They also get their own hand of 5 cards, as well as their own, move these over, their own 3 starting characters. Now that all teams are equal, they all have 3 characters and a hand of 5 cards and their own unique action counters. We are ready to go. This would be the setup for a 4-player game.
Now that you've set up the game, you're ready to begin playing. To determine the starting player, roll the die. The clock dial is then rotated to show the starting player's position. If the hunter player wins the die roll, the clock dial is rotated to dawn. If the vampire player wins, the clock dial is rotated to dusk. The battle for each location will last 1 full day-night cycle and is tracked using the clock dial. Vampires are more powerful at night, hunters are more powerful during the day. The first player then chooses the location for the first battle. Each location dial shows the number of bystanders at the location. The players will be battling for these bystanders to join their teams. The player who wins the most bystanders at a location wins that location. The player who wins the most locations in Blackwood wins the game. Once the first location is chosen, rotate that location dial to the in-play status. Now that the starting location is determined, the first player lays out the appropriate number of bystanders for that location on the guide mat. The first player then lays out his or her character cards on the guide mat, and his or her opponent does the same. Now the first player is ready to begin his or her turn. Each turn consists of 4 steps. Step 1 is to perform 3 actions. An action may be playing a combat card, moving a character, drawing a card, playing a blood or adrenaline token, or giving a character to a teammate in a 3 or 4 player game. If a player does not use all 3 of his or her actions on a turn, up to 2 actions can be banked and spent on a later turn. Use the action tokens to track banked actions. The most common and complex action is to play combat cards. We'll discuss how to play combat cards in depth in a moment. The second step in each player's turn is to discard and draw. Players may discard as many cards as they choose and draw up to a full hand. The third step is to unstun characters. During the course of combat, a character may have been stunned by special cards. This is the point at which they would be unstunned. The fourth and final step of a player's turn is to rotate the clock dial. This ends his or her turn and indicates the start of the next player's turn. Now that we've described a full turn, let's go back and talk about how combat cards work. The Hunter and Vampire decks are each unique, but they are both made up of the same 4 card types. Those card types are Attack, Impact, Strike, and Dodge. Attack cards are the most commonly played cards in the deck. They are orange and have an attack value in the top left corner. When an attack card is played, the player places his or her attack counter on the matching space of the combat track for the character that is making the attack. It's important to note that attack values are not added. Instead, when a new attack card is played, the current attack value is moved to reflect only the value from the new card. Some attack cards have an attack value that can change depending on whether it's played during the day or the night. Other attack cards have a symbol of a die instead of a number, which means that the attack value for that card is determined by a die roll. Attack cards may also have a special effect that occurs when the card is played. In some cases, the effect happens in addition to the attack value. But in other cases, the player must choose whether to play the card for its attack value or for its special effect. Impact cards are purple and are used to modify existing attack values, draw cards, force discards, and other powerful effects. Strike cards are red and are used to destroy opponent characters, removing them from the game unless the opponent can play a dodge card. Dodge cards are blue and are used only to cancel strike cards. When a dodge card is played, both the dodge and strike cards are immediately discarded. One of the vampire strike cards is a bite card. If a vampire character successfully plays a bite card on a hunter character, the bite card is placed on that hunter character. The hunter character is stunned, and the vampire player adds a blood token to his or her blood pool. Blood tokens are also earned when a vampire successfully plays a drain card on a hunter. If a hunter character remains bitten until dusk, the hunter character immediately turns into a vampire and is added to the vampire player's reinforcement pile. His or her attack counter is removed, and the bite card is discarded. Vampire players may use an action to feed a blood token to a vampire. The fed vampire character immediately adds 2 points to his or her attack. That vampire then adds 2 to any subsequent attacks made by the character during that battle. When a hunter destroys a vampire character with a strike card, the vampire and his or her attack counter are immediately removed, and the hunter player earns 1 adrenaline token. A hunter player may use an action to activate the adrenaline token. When an adrenaline token is activated, that hunter player's number of actions increases by 1 for the duration of that battle. A battle ends once the clock dial has made 1 full rotation. The attack values in each column are compared. The player that has the highest attack value wins that bystander. If there is a tie, no one wins that bystander. The player that wins the most bystanders wins control of that location. The location dial is rotated to show which side controls that location. If players control an equal number of columns, that location is a draw, and the location dial is rotated to locked. All characters are returned to their players. And bystanders that were won by players now join the ranks of the winning players. Bystanders in tied columns are discarded. All attack counters are returned to their players. The player who controls the fewest locations becomes the next player. If players are tied for locations, players roll the die to determine the next player. In this scenario, the vampires control 2 locations. The hunters control only 1, so the hunters become the starting players. The hunters choose the location of the next battle, and the clock dial is set to dawn. The game ends when all locations show a status of hunter-controlled, vampire-controlled, or locked. If one player controls more locations than the other, that player wins the game. If there is a tie, the player with the highest number of characters wins the game. That covers the basics of how to play Bloodsuckers. The rulebook contains more details, as well as alternate rules. Thanks for watching.